Imagine standing in your living room, surrounded by decades of achievements, family photos, certificates, mementos of a life well lived, when someone walks in and within minutes makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself, not through criticism, but through praise so perfectly crafted that it feels like they're reading your soul. You feel seen, understood, validated in ways you haven't experienced in years, but you've just become prey. This is Machiavelli's most sinister insight, one that Niccolo himself would have recognized immediately. Your greatest strength becomes your deadliest weakness when wielded against you by someone who understands the game. The very pride you've earned through decades of experience, the wisdom you've accumulated, the recognition you deserve, these become the threads by which master manipulators pull you into their web. Why does this happen to intelligent, experienced people? Why do those who've navigated life's complexities for 60, 70, even 80 years suddenly find themselves outmaneuvered by someone half their age? The answer lies in a psychological trap so elegant that even Machiavelli would applaud its effectiveness. Consider this paradox. The more you've accomplished, the more vulnerable you become. The more wisdom you've gained, the easier you are to deceive. The more respect you've earned, the more desperately you need it validated. This isn't weakness, it's human nature weaponized against you. You've spent decades building your identity around competence, around being the person others turn to for advice, around earning your place in the world through merit and experience. But what happens when someone appears who seems to see that worth more clearly than anyone else ever has? What happens when they position themselves as the first person to truly appreciate the depth of your insight, the value of your experience, the wisdom you possess? You lower your guard, you open your heart, and you walk straight into a trap 500 years in the making. The question that should terrify you isn't whether you're too trusting. It's whether your need for recognition has become so profound that you can no longer distinguish between genuine appreciation and sophisticated manipulation. Have you become so hungry for validation that you've forgotten how to detect the difference between someone who truly sees your worth and someone who's simply mirroring it back to you for their own purposes? This is where your journey of liberation must begin, in the uncomfortable recognition that your greatest asset might be your greatest liability. Subscribe to our channel and give this video a like if you're ready to uncover the psychological traps that even the wisest among us fall into. The trap you've fallen into has roots stretching back to the foundations of human psychology, illuminated by minds from Machiavelli to Carl Jung. What you're experiencing isn't personal failing. It's how pride and identity intertwine in the human psyche, creating vulnerabilities that skilled manipulators have exploited for centuries. Niccolo Machiavelli understood something profound about human nature. People don't just want power, they want to feel worthy of it. He recognized that the most effective way to control someone isn't through fear or force, but by making them feel special, chosen, uniquely valuable. This insight forms the cornerstone of what we might call Machiavellian psychology, the understanding that pride isn't just vanity, it's a psychological need so fundamental that people will sacrifice almost anything to protect it. Carl Jung would have called this your persona, the carefully constructed identity you present to the world, built from your achievements, roles, and social recognition. But Jung also warned that the more invested you become in your persona, the more vulnerable you are to anyone who threatens or, conversely, validates it. Your sense of self becomes dependent on external confirmation, creating what Jung called psychological inflation, a state where your identity becomes so attached to being special that you lose the ability to see yourself clearly. This is where Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of ressentiment becomes crucial. Nietzsche observed that as people age, they often develop a deep need to justify their existence through their accumulated wisdom and experience. You begin to define yourself not just by what you've done, but by what you know, what you've learned, what insights you possess that others lack. This creates what he called the pride of the sage, a psychological state where your self-worth becomes tied to being recognized as wise, experienced, valuable. But here's where the trap springs. Manipulators understand that your need for this recognition is so profound that they can exploit it by becoming the mirror that reflects back exactly the image of yourself you most want to see. They don't need to convince you they're wonderful. They need to convince you that you are, and that they're the only one who truly sees it. Arthur Schopenhauer recognized this pattern in what he called intellectual vanity, the tendency of intelligent people to become so invested in being right, being wise, being respected for their mental acuity, that they become blind to emotional manipulation. You become so focused on having your intelligence validated that you miss the emotional games being played around that validation. The philosopher Martin Heidegger identified another crucial element, what he called thrownness, the way your past experiences and achievements create a sense of destiny, of being specially positioned in life. You begin to feel that your unique combination of experiences makes you particularly insightful, particularly valuable. This isn't wrong. You are valuable. But this sense of special positioning creates what psychologists now call cognitive privilege bias, the belief that your perspective is inherently more valuable than others, which makes you hungry for people who confirm this belief. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, observed how people who've overcome significant challenges often develop what he called suffering superiority, a sense that their struggles have given them insights others lack. Again, this isn't wrong. Struggle does create wisdom, but it also creates a psychological need for that wisdom to be recognized, acknowledged, validated by others. This is the psychological soil in which Machiavelli's trap grows. Your legitimate pride in your accomplishments and insights becomes a need for external validation of that pride. And once you need something from someone else, even something as seemingly harmless as recognition, you've given them power over you. The manipulation doesn't feel like manipulation because it's feeding something real and legitimate within you. The predator doesn't need to lie about your worth. They simply need to position themselves as the only one who truly sees it. The devastation this trap creates operates on levels so subtle, you might not recognize the damage until it's almost irreversible. Unlike obvious manipulation, crude demands, transparent lies, clear exploitation, Machiavellian pride manipulation rewires your psychological landscape from within, leaving you wondering how someone you trusted completely could have been studying you like a specimen. The first invisible consequence is what psychologists call validation dependency, a state where your self-worth becomes increasingly tied to one person's opinion of you. You begin to unconsciously adjust your behavior, your thoughts, even your memories to maintain their positive regard. You start sentences with, "as their name says," or find yourself repeating their observations about your wisdom as if they were your own insights. Your identity slowly merges with their perception of you, and you lose the ability to evaluate yourself independently. Neurologically, something even more insidious occurs. When someone consistently validates your deepest need for recognition, your brain produces what researchers call social reward chemicals: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, in response to their presence or approval. You become biochemically addicted to their validation, experiencing withdrawal symptoms when they withhold it. Brain scans show that social validation addiction follows the same neural pathways as substance dependency. The cognitive bias this creates is particularly cruel because it exploits your intelligence against you. You begin engaging in what psychologists term motivated reasoning, using your considerable analytical abilities not to evaluate this person objectively, but to justify why they're different, why they truly understand you, why they're the exception to every red flag your experience should be detecting. Your wisdom becomes the very tool used to rationalize your blindness. Socially, you begin experiencing what researchers call relationship triangulation. Without recognizing it, the manipulator subtly positions themselves as the authority on your worth relative to others, suggesting that family members don't truly appreciate your insights, that friends don't understand your depth, that previous relationships failed because others couldn't match your intellectual sophistication. They become the sole validator of your value, isolating you not through obvious control, but by making everyone else seem inadequate by comparison. The existential consequence is perhaps the most profound. You begin experiencing what Viktor Frankl called existential vacuum in reverse. Instead of feeling meaningless, you feel hyper-meaning, as if this person has unlocked the ultimate significance of your life and experiences. You become convinced that your previous relationships, achievements, even your sense of self, were somehow incomplete until they arrived to properly contextualize your worth. This creates what Jung would recognize as psychological possession, a state where an external person becomes so central to your identity that you can no longer distinguish between your authentic self and their perception of you. You lose access to what Jung called your inner voice, that deep, intuitive sense of truth that guided you through decades of life experience. The manipulation succeeds precisely because it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like coming home to yourself. It feels like finally being seen for who you really are. The predator doesn't attack your self-esteem. They become its sole source. They don't diminish your pride. They become its primary mirror. They don't make you doubt your worth. They make you doubt everyone else's ability to recognize it. Perhaps most tragically, this process often unfolds during life stages when you're already vulnerable to questions about relevance, purpose, and legacy. The manipulator doesn't create these insecurities. They exploit them with surgical precision, offering themselves as the solution to existential questions you might not even have consciously acknowledged you were asking. By the time you recognize what's happening, your entire sense of reality has been subtly restructured around their presence. Your achievements feel meaningful primarily because they validate them. Your wisdom feels valuable primarily because they recognize it. Your very sense of self feels coherent primarily because they reflect it back to you. You haven't just been manipulated, you've been psychologically colonized. And the most insidious part is that recognizing this feels like betraying not just them, but yourself. Breaking free from Machiavelli's trap requires psychological rebellion that goes against every instinct your ego wants to follow. Liberation doesn't begin with rejecting pride. It begins with understanding the difference between authentic pride and ego hunger, between genuine confidence and validation addiction, between wisdom and the need to have your wisdom confirmed by others. The first act of rebellion is what Carl Jung called facing the shadow, acknowledging that your very strengths have become weapons in someone else's hands. You must confront the uncomfortable truth that your intelligence, experience, and achievements created the vulnerability that was exploited. This isn't self-blame, it's strategic clarity. A general who understands how their own tactics were turned against them is infinitely more dangerous than one who refuses to acknowledge the defeat. Begin by conducting what Friedrich Nietzsche would call a revaluation of values. Question not your worth, but your need for external validation of that worth. Your decades of experience taught you to evaluate people by their actions over time, not by their words in the moment. Apply this wisdom to yourself. What actions in your life prove your value, independent of anyone else's recognition? What achievements stand solid without requiring another person's interpretation to feel meaningful? The ancient Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius, understood something crucial about psychological freedom. External validation is not just unnecessary for self-worth. It's actively dangerous to it. When you need someone else to confirm your value, you've given them the power to deny it. True strength comes from what Marcus called inner citadel, a sense of self so grounded in your own evaluation that others can appreciate you without being able to control you. Here's where the rebellion becomes practical. Start deliberately seeking situations where your worth isn't acknowledged or even noticed. Volunteer anonymously. Help someone without taking credit. Engage in activities where you're a beginner again. This isn't humility for its own sake. It's psychological strength training. You're rebuilding your capacity to feel valuable without external confirmation. Develop what psychologists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own thought patterns as they occur. When you catch yourself feeling particularly good because someone praised your insight, pause and ask, what would I think about this situation if this person disappeared tomorrow? If the insight loses its luster without their validation, you've identified a point of psychological vulnerability that needs strengthening. Practice what the Buddha would recognize as non-attachment to outcomes of social interaction. Enter conversations without needing to be seen as wise, experienced, or special. Speak your truth without requiring others to acknowledge its brilliance. Share your thoughts without needing them reflected back to you in amplified form. This creates what psychologists call intrinsic motivation, action based on internal rewards rather than external validation. Perhaps most importantly, reclaim what Jung called your inner authority. You survived decades of life's complexities by developing internal guidance systems, intuition, pattern recognition, emotional intelligence. These systems became compromised when you outsourced their validation to someone else. Rebuild trust in your own perceptual abilities by making small decisions based purely on your internal sense of rightness, without seeking confirmation. The ultimate rebellion is learning to value being unknown rather than being understood, being helpful rather than being appreciated, being wise rather than being seen as wise. This doesn't mean becoming invisible or undervaluing yourself. It means deriving your sense of worth from sources that can't be manipulated by others. When someone's validation stops feeling necessary for your sense of self, you've achieved something revolutionary: psychological sovereignty. You become unmovable, not because you're closed to others, but because your center of gravity is internal. You can appreciate recognition without depending on it, enjoy praise without requiring it, share wisdom without needing it reflected back to you. This is how you transform from prey into predator, not by becoming manipulative yourself, but by becoming unmanipulatable. The strongest position in any psychological game is not needing to play it. The supreme truth that emerges from escaping Machiavelli's trap is both liberating and sobering. The experience of being manipulated through your pride has revealed something profound about human connection and the illusion of specialness that governs most relationships. Here is the paradox that will reshape how you see everything. The person who manipulated you wasn't lying when they told you that you were special, wise, and uniquely valuable. You are, but so is every person they've ever manipulated, and so is every person you'll ever meet. The manipulation succeeded not because they saw something false in you, but because they understood something true about the human condition: that everyone carries within them extraordinary depth, wisdom, and value that goes largely unrecognized by the world. Carl Jung spent his life studying what he called the collective unconscious, recognizing that beneath our individual personalities lies a shared pool of human experience, archetypal wisdom, and universal truth. Every person you encounter has access to this profound depth. Every individual who has lived 6, 7, 8 decades has accumulated genuine insights, survived real struggles, developed authentic wisdom. The manipulator's skill wasn't seeing something unique in you. It was understanding that everyone desperately wants their universal human worth acknowledged as special. This realization leads to what Friedrich Nietzsche called amor fati, love of fate, acceptance of what is. The experience of being manipulated through your pride wasn't a failure of judgment. It was an inevitable consequence of being human in a world where most people go through life feeling unseen, unappreciated, and unrecognized for their true depth. Your vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the natural result of living in a society that systematically fails to acknowledge the profound worth inherent in every human being. But here's where the supreme truth becomes transformative. Once you understand that everyone possesses this depth, you can no longer be manipulated by someone pretending to be the only one who sees it. More importantly, you can no longer manipulate others by positioning yourself as the sole recognizer of their worth. You become, in the deepest sense, immune to both giving and receiving this form of psychological exploitation. The ultimate realization is that genuine connection, the kind you thought you were experiencing with your manipulator, becomes possible once you stop needing to be special and start recognizing that everyone already is. When you can see extraordinary wisdom in ordinary conversation with a grocery store clerk, when you can recognize profound insights in your neighbor's simple observations, when you can appreciate depth without needing to be its discoverer or primary audience, then you've achieved something that transcends both manipulation and loneliness. This leads to what Viktor Frankl called self-transcendence, the recognition that meaning comes not from being valued by others, but from valuing others. Your pride transforms from a need to be recognized into a capacity to recognize. Your wisdom evolves from something you possess into something you participate in. Your experience becomes not a credential that demands acknowledgement, but a lens through which you can appreciate the credentials of everyone around you. The final truth is this: the person who manipulated you gave you an accidental gift. They showed you how hunger for recognition makes you vulnerable, yes, but they also showed you how powerful genuine recognition can be when given freely, without agenda, without the need for anything in return. They demonstrated, through negative example, what authentic appreciation looks like and what it doesn't. You now possess something more valuable than immunity to manipulation, the ability to offer others the genuine recognition that their manipulators only pretended to provide. You can see worth without needing to be its primary audience. You can acknowledge wisdom without requiring it to reflect back on your own insight. You can appreciate others' specialness without diminishing your own. This is how you transform a wound into wisdom, a vulnerability into strength, a trap into a doorway to deeper humanity. Share in the comments below. How has your journey through life's experiences changed your relationship with pride and recognition? Subscribe to our channel and give this video a like as we continue exploring the profound insights that emerge from life's most challenging lessons.